So in this video, we will be looking at adding sensors in PRTG via an external script. We'll be using Powershell and PRTG API calls to handle this. We'll be using the same example as the previous video, and that is, we have a bunch of files in a folder, and we want to monitor two things about each one of those files. For example, the size and their last modified date. So to get started, we'll create a normal file sensor and point it to one of our files. And then we'll convert this to a template, and then we'll have an external script that'll take this template and clone it for each of the other files in this folder. So I've started off by adding a new device here. As we'll be using the file sensor, I've already given it authentication details to log onto my server, and I will add a file sensor. Now the file name that I put in here is going to be the path of one of the files. So I'll pick file 1. If we read this little tooltip, it'll say don't use C:, use $. So long as $C is actually shared, as it is by default. So we'll just check this actually runs. It all looks good. We'll come into settings, we'll just call it template. We'll save this, and we don't actually want this to run anymore, so I'm going to pause it. I'm going to pause this, I'm going to put in the message that it's now a template, and also back in settings, I'm going to give it a template tag. The template tag, I'll talk about in another video. It's just so when I have a bunch of paused sensors, I can quickly filter out which ones are templates, etc., and see which ones are paused for unknown reasons. So if we jump over to our script now, this isn't a scripting video, so I'm not going to cover this in too much detail, but for this particular script, I'm going to need to fill in the template sensor. This will be the ID of the template I just created, the parent device, which will be the destination, and the folder path, which will remain the same, which are scanning for files. But in essence, it's going to look at this folder, and for each one of the files, it's just going to add it if it doesn't already exist. I will cover more of these functions in a scripting video, but you can see everything here and you should be able to follow this. We'll just get our template sensor ID and our device ID. So back in PRTG, our template sensor is 2483, and the device that we want to put them in is 2465. So here we have that in place, so we can run this now. And you can see here it's adding sensors for 1.txt and 2.txt. And if we have a look at our file structure, we can see we have a 1 and a 2. So it's added both of those. And if we look back at PRTG and refresh it, we can see that it's adding these files. If I click on 2.txt and go to settings, we can see that the file name is pointing to 2.txt. Okay, so let's change one of these files and see what happens. So we'll change this from a 2 to a 3. And back in our script, we'll run this again, and you can see that it's adding 3.txt. Obviously, there's no code in the script above that says 2.txt no longer exists, remove this, but you could easily add that. But likewise, you generally don't want to delete data out of PRTG, you might just want to pause the sensor. But as this isn't a real world example, I'm just trying to keep this as simple as possible. So we'll head back into PRTG, and we can see that 3.txt is added, and 2.txt is coming up with a warning. It's not being able to find the file, it's now in error state, which is expected. So of course the final step is to get this to run periodically. Of course, Windows Schedule Task is the easiest option, but there's plenty of others, and I'll really leave it up to you. One real-world example of this that you could implement is to enumerate through all your virtual machines, and then look up each one of those virtual machines in Veeam, or whatever backup software you use, and see how many hours it's been since the last successful backup or replication.